at least some kind of connection and some kind of entertainment and some kind of engagement with the migration that's happening right now. So yeah, so a few things before we get started on tonight's talk. Firstly, any questions for our fine talker this evening, our fine speaker, please put them in the chat. Type them in the chat and we'll ask questions at the end. We'll have a little Q&A at the end. We've also created a survey just to see how people like what we're doing and how we're doing with this format. That's pinned at the top of the live chat, so it only takes a couple of minutes. Feel free to do that if you've got the time. Don't worry if not. To rewatch today's video, it's possible to do so. You can do so by following a link which will be on the Migweek website tomorrow. So the day after each talk, you'll be able to access the talk again to watch it. And we want to thank our partners for Migweek, as always, Bempton Cliffs RSPB, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, of course, Flamborough Bird Observatory, and Yorkshire Coast Nature. I should say one little thing about Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and say thank you very much for once again hosting us. They host us physically for our talks at the Living Sea Centre during real, normal Migweeks, and they're hosting us virtually via their online services this year. So it's really great that they've gone to the effort of doing so, especially Anna, who's beavering away behind the screens, behind the scenes right now, who's done a great job of making this happen. We've got lots of talks coming up. We've got talks on Monday from Stu McKenzie from Bird Studies Canada about technology. We've got a talk on Thursday from Sorrel Lyle about diversity in birding. We've got talks over the weekend from myself about knockmig. We've just heard that Dave O'Hara from RSPB Bempton will be doing a talk on Sunday night. There's tons of stuff going on the website. Anna's been working hard on graphics for very cool ringing recoveries and distances that birds are covering. There will be something live every night. So when there's not a talk, we can put together videos and there will be fresh content to watch every single night at 7 o'clock and plenty to enjoy during the day on those on that website as well. I think that's probably about it for now. Before you all tune off, I'd like to introduce my really good friend and colleague, Richard Baines, who's going to talk to us about whale and seabird adventures in Yorkshire. Over to you, Rich.
Thanks very much, Mark. Okay, we're just going to make sure the presentation's running smoothly now. Hopefully you can all see the first slide of my presentation tonight. So I'm Richard Baines, Director in partnership with Steve Race of Yorkshire Coast Nature and ecologist. I grew up in the northeast in Middlesbrough, not very far from where our talk is based tonight, in Staithes. So I used to go bird watching a lot on the Yorkshire coast as a teenager around Scaling Dam, Boolby Cliffs. I would always get, in those days, in the 1980s, when I was a teenager, the bus down to Boolby and Staithes and do a lot of bird watching. So it's fantastic to be talking about that particular region of the North York Moors National Park tonight and our exciting wildlife boat trips that we started in 2013. And there's been a bit of a labour of love since then in many ways. So the talk tonight is entitled Whales in Yorkshire, Don't Be Daft, because that's exactly what people used to say to me about 7 years ago when we started the boat trips. We were inspired by Whitby whale watching and some of the trips they were doing in the early days at that time. And we started our trips from Staithes. So this is the story of some of the highlights from the trips that we've had over the last 7 years. So I just thought I'd start with a map of the North York Moors National Park to actually show people where we are, because we're very conscious tonight there may not be any international people people from different parts of the world watching tonight, but hopefully there are, and I'm not going to presume everybody knows exactly where we're based. So this is the North York Moors National Park, and I've highlighted Staithes up there in the northeastern part of the national park on the coast, and you can see where we are in relation to the rest of Great Britain. Traditionally thought of as in the north of England, of course, but obviously from a UK perspective and a birds and wildlife perspective, we're probably in the Midlands. I'm probably going to get slaughtered for saying that later, but yeah, that's where we are. And huge thanks tonight for a collection of photographers. Lots of photographs of my own tonight in the presentation, but I've also got photographs from my business partner Steve Race and our fantastic friends and Yorkshire Coast Nature Guides, ornithologists, Mark Pearson, Dan Lombard, George Day, and local landscape photographer David Eccles. Okay, so this is a photograph of Staithes, the village, taken from the northern side of the village, just below the cliff of Cowbar, not to be confused by one of our Yorkshire Coast Nature Guides, Jono, who insists on calling it Crowbar. So if you're on one of our trips and Jono says, please meet us at Crowbar, then you'll know it's Cowbar. It's a beautiful cliff line and fantastic coastline, very spectacular village, and we often just marvel at the coast as we're going out on the boat and coming back in again. So that's a view of Staithes nestled on the North Yorkshire coast there. So the first question, how did we get out on the waves? How did we start our boat trips in 2013? Well, I first met our skipper, whose boat it is, in 2012, 2013 in the North York Moors National Park at one of their events. And we got talking about the things we were doing at the time and the inspiration we both had, the love we both had for the North Yorkshire coast and its wildlife. And Sean mentioned that he would love to do boat trips watching the wildlife, and particularly the whales on the coast at the time. So I was straight in with both feet, very, very keen immediately to give the trips a go. And we went out and did some reconnaissance trips. We were very worried at the time that we called them whale watching trips. We didn't want to call them whale watching trips because we didn't want to put all our eggs in the whale basket as such. So we decided to call them seabird and whale trips because we were inspired not only by the whales and dolphins on the coast, but also by the seabirds. So it was first of all, it was a chance meeting between myself and the skipper, Sean. You can see him at the back of the boat there with his fingers up, looking quite excited, as he often is when he's showing people the wildlife. So this is another slide of one of our first trips. It's actually a video, hopefully. What do you think? Yeah! Hopefully you can experience the excitement firsthand there. You can see the excitement of our trip on one of our first trips there when we'd seen whales. Everybody gets very excited, and we can't help but give a big cheer for all the wildlife we've been seeing, particularly the whales. So the first boat that Sean had, All My Sons, was a small boat and not particularly big enough for a slightly bigger group, and not so spacious as we really needed it. So 2 years ago, Sean rang me up and said, get on the internet, look at this boat, what do you think? I was very excited because I was secretly hoping he would think about getting a new boat. And this is the boat that he managed to buy. And we started the trips in 2019 on the new boat, originally called Delta Barbara, but soon to be renamed All My Sons, when Sean got his paint brush out and made sure it continued the tradition that his father had started with the boat name All My Sons. So this is the boat we run at the moment, the trips that we do with Sean on this boat. So the trips are all about us sharing our expertise and excitement. Every time we go on a boat, whether it's myself as a guide or one of our other guides that work with us, Mark, Jono or Margaret, we're so excited to show people the wildlife. I think that's the mark of a really good guide, somebody who feels just as much excitement as the people on the trip. I get very excited on the first boat trip of the year. This year, especially excited because we didn't think we were going to run any trips. So when we started the trips again in July, in the same way as every year, even more this year, I got very excited. Felt like a little kid, really, going out on the waves for the first time, even though we've been doing it for 7 years. And I think when you're teaching people about wildlife, you have to have that excitement about it. You have to have that inspiration to show people the amazing things we have. So what I thought I'd do is work through the different birds and wildlife that we've seen on the trips, some of my particular highlights, some of my favourite experiences that we've discovered. And right from the beginning of the trips, I was really inspired by the nesting seabirds on the coast, particularly in July, maybe slightly too early for some of the migration. So when we start the boat trips early July, there's lots of seabirds around the coastline that we get behind the boat when we're throwing out some of the chum, some of the fish that we feed to the seabirds to bring them closer to the boat. And the birds we see at that time of year are nesting on the coast. So the first few slides are birds that are nesting on the coastline at that time of year, on the cliffs at Cowbar and up and down the North York Moors National Park. This slide is kittiwakes and northern fulmar. It's wonderful to see seabirds feeding naturally behind the boat. The birds we see on the boat, I always tell people what I felt the first time I saw these seabirds. I felt as though everything looked great behind the boat. Even the herring gulls that we used to pinch in our chips look fantastic. Nothing looks uninteresting because you can learn things about these seabirds behind the boat, feeding in a natural way that you can't necessarily learn when they're trying to pinch your chips in Whitby or Scarborough. So it's wonderful to see them acting the way they should be behind the boat. So by far my favourite nesting seabird on the North Yorkshire coastline is northern fulmar. They're a petrel. They're one of the closely related birds to petrels and albatrosses that we have. They've got a tube at the top of the bill, which you can see on this photograph, and a remarkably colourful bill, a really, really distinctive bird. It's the only member of the petrel family that breed on the Yorkshire coastline, and they're very unique in many different ways. One of the reasons I love fulmars is because you always have an interesting experience with fulmars on the trips. It may be from photography. This is my favourite photograph that I've been able to take of fulmar over the years from the trips. I've not played with the colour on this photograph, but the blue light on that particular day created a blue sheen to the wings, and I really love this photograph because it demonstrates to me what a beautiful bird a fulmar is. So when they fly past the boat, they look very graceful. They shear, so they glide past the boat effortlessly, very close to the water, because the closer these seabirds can get to the water on migration and during longer flights, then the less drag that they experience from the wind, so less energy expenditure. So it's a fantastic adaptation of seabirds to be able to fly very close to the waves. Closer to the waves they can get, the better for them. So this is one of my favourite photographs that I've taken from the boat from the last few years. This is another great one that I remember very clearly on many, many trips, is watching fulmar's belly flop behind the boat. When they come in and glide effortlessly into the boat, you think, wow, what a beautiful, effortless bird. Very, very elegant. And then there's a massive belly flop as they come to feed behind the boat. So they change very quickly to a gregarious bird behind the boat. Quite a lot of fun watching them belly flop and start feeding, changing from an elegant bird to quite a gregarious, fun bird to watch. This is a photograph taken by my business colleague Steve Race, who's a professional wildlife photographer. Amazing photograph. You can see the bill really well there. The other thing you can see is that the eye is nestled in a little dark socket. Anybody who really enjoys photography will know how important it is to get the catch light in the eye of a bird, because it brings it to life. One of the particular challenges of fulmar is that their eye rests in a little pocket, a little nestled dark socket, which means that getting the catch light in the eye is actually quite tricky. So every time I take a photograph of fulmar and manage to get the catch light, I feel I've achieved something, because it's quite tricky, really. But every time we see fulmars behind the boat, we get a different experience. So another breeding seabird of the coastline around Staithes is razorbill. We're not sure how recent the razorbill colonisation of the cliffs along this particular part of the North York coastline is, but now there are quite a number of razorbills nesting on the coast, very close to where we run the boat trips from, around Cowbar Cliff. And this is a photograph I took in July. It's an adult razorbill and a newly fledged juvenile. Our boat trips in July, and if you're on the coastline in July, it's a great time to see the first chicks come off the cliffs from razorbills. And it's a wonderful thing to watch when you watch these birds feeding and the adult razorbills teaching them how to feed. It's a great thing to experience. And on the boat, it gets even better, because you're up close, you can watch them feeding much better than you can from the cliffs when they might be a bit far out. So it's a big highlight of mine in July, the boat trips in July, to be able to watch these auks feeding and training, the adults training them how to feed. So alongside razorbills that actually nest on the cliffs at Staithes, we also, at exactly the same time of year, we have guillemots around the boat. And guillemots, as far as we know, don't nest on that section of the coastline because there's no ledges. Guillemots need a ledge to actually sit on, and the structure and the geology of the North Yorkshire coast isn't suitable. So the guillemots that we find at the same time of year as the razorbills must be coming from Bempton. So Bempton is about 65 kilometres south of Staithes, where we do the boat trips. So these guillemots are drifting up, moving up to feed on our coastline closer to where we do the boat trips from. And you can see this guillemot in the same way as the razorbill has a little chick, a newly fledged juvenile with it. On the 17th of July this year, I took this photograph. And again, I'm really always very excited to watch the behaviour of these birds, teaching their juveniles how to feed and how to dive, how to escape from predators. Lots of tuition from guillemots and razorbills in the middle of the July when the chicks first jump off the cliffs. So that's guillemot and razorbills, but at the same time as the guillemot and razorbills are teaching their young how to survive, Atlantic puffins, the adults have already left the cliffs, and the juveniles basically have to fend for themselves. When a juvenile puffin leaves its burrow at Bempton, 60 kilometres south of Staithes, where we do the boat trips from, then the juvenile puffin is basically on its own. We never see an adult puffin with a juvenile puffin on our boat trips. They're always separate. This particular trip on the 17th of July this year, I was really excited to see lots of puffins, but they're all in groups of very similar ages. So these two adults together, basically fending for themselves, may have finished breeding. So they probably finished breeding and now on the sea, heading north for the winter. On the same trip, we saw some first summer puffins. So this is a puffin with a completely different bill. It hasn't developed the size of the sheath of the keratin and the bill as the adults have. So it's almost certainly a first summer puffin. So it's about a year old. prior to it getting into breeding age, which is usually around 3 years old. So this was the first summer puffin on the same day, on the 17th of July. And on the same day, we also saw some juvenile puffins. So the juvenile puffins that we saw on the 17th of July will have just come out the burrow. So that was really exciting, and always very exciting highlights of our trips every year is when we first see the first juvenile puffins on the sea. And for photographing juvenile puffins, you've really got to be on a boat. It's hard to photograph them on the cliffs. It's a fantastic thing to see them on a boat, especially on such a beautiful glassy sea such as this one. This is a photograph taken by Mark, and it really is a cracking image of a juvenile puffin, completely different to the adult. So this time of year, that time of year, middle of July, is a great time of year to see all the different ages of puffins, and we had a particularly good day this year on the 17th of July. Also, one of our breeding seabirds of the Yorkshire coastline is northern gannets. Gannets breed at the same place as puffins down at Bempton, and we get gannets behind the boats, diving behind the boats, and just doing what gannets do, just being really impressive and fantastic birds to watch. We get good numbers right the way through the summer and the autumn. They're kind of present virtually every trip. And always great to photograph, especially when they've come as close as this bird did that Mark photographed. Wonderful, wonderful picture. So moving on now to the migrant seabirds. This is always a highlight of the year. Once we get to the sort of third week of July, we start getting the first skewers coming through. The most regularly seen skewer is the great skewer on our trips. And it's a really exciting moment whenever we pick up a great skewer behind the boat. If we see a great skewer as a guide coming behind the boat to try and fight the other seabirds for food, then we always get excited. They're really scrappy and almost like a little haystack floating on the sea when you see them on the waves. But when they're flying around, they're very agile. And they will attack any other bird that they can to try to get them to drop their food. They're pirates of the sea. And what I have found over the years is the birds behind the boat feeding on the chum that we throw out, the birds that are in the greatest numbers tend to be dominant. However, if one great skewer comes behind the boat, then that one great skewer will be dominant over the other birds. So every other species, it's just based on numbers, whichever is in a greater number, but the great skewer, we only need one great skewer to be dominant. I've also noticed from watching these birds from the boat is that great skewers have two different forms of attack. They can circle around the top of the boat, circling around and waiting for the best moment, but their favorite form of attack seems to be doing big loops behind the boat, going quite far away, but always watching the birds that are feeding on the fish. And then on their big sweep closer to the boat, they will try and time the perfect moment when some of the other birds, the gulls often, herring gulls, great blackback gulls, have fish. And if a bird grabs the fish just at the moment the great skewer is flying past, that's when the great skewer will pounce. So this big sweeping flight behind the boat, and a wonderful thing to watch when you actually learn about the behavior of these birds. So that's great skewer. We also have Arctic skewers every year. We see on the coastline, Arctic skewers have two different color phases. They're not different species, they're not different subspecies. Arctic skewers nest in the north of Shetland and Orkney Islands, so very far north of Scotland, in the same way as the great skewers. So they're British breeding birds, but only in relatively small numbers in the far north of the UK. They come through late July, August, tend to peak later in August, a little bit later than the great skewers. So this is a really lovely pale phase, but we also have dark phase Arctic skewers. Structurally, same shape, they're just all dark. compared to the paler phases. So they're lovely to see. They often chase smaller birds, such as kittiwakes, trying to get them to drop their fish, whereas great skewers tend to have no limit to the birds that they can chase, even the huge great black-backed gulls, as in the photograph. So when we have a lucky day, we see some slightly scarcer birds. So Pomeranian skewer occurs every year on our trips, but only in very small numbers. This one, I'll never forget this bird. This Pomeranian skewer spent about 20 minutes around the boat, just floating around the boat, waiting for a good opportunity to grab some fish from other birds. The 5th of August 2017, a beautiful day. I'll never forget it. This Pomeranian skewer was a joy to watch and a great opportunity for photographs. Pomeranian skewers nest in the high Arctic. So one of the migrants that we get on the boat trips, which creates lots of excitement, because you can't help thinking about where these birds come from. Pomeranian skewers breed in the high Arctic, the tundra, so they've flown thousands of miles to get into the North Sea on their migration down to Africa. And it's a real privilege when you see these birds, and especially exciting when they're quite spectacular to watch, such as this Pomeranian skewer. Often referred to as poms or pom skewer by birders. So they're the skewers that we regularly see through the late summer on migration. So now moving on to shearwaters. Minke shearwaters are the most regularly encountered shearwater on our trips. I really like the photographs we managed to take that has the North Yorkshire coastline in the background, so you can't go wrong, you know where we are. And this photograph of a nice flock of Minke shearwaters, and you can see there that they're moving around, shearing, as their name describes, over the water. Very similar to fulmar. They're long-distance migrants, what's known as pelagic birds, as in they spend the majority of their life at sea. So they're long-distance migrants, and their adaptation of being able to fly close to the water really helps them, because that less energy, less drag. And Minke shearwater, one of the best species to see that in action, really close to the water, skimming the water. Wonderful, wonderful bird to see. Minke shearwaters breed in the British Isles, but on the west coast of the UK, so we only get them as migrants down the North Yorkshire coastline. Best time of year tends to be July. They tend to move through earlier rather than later in August, September. They tend to be end of June, first few weeks in July, but we do get them in August as well. Sooty shearwater we see on our trips every year. This is a particularly exciting bird to see because sooty shearwaters don't breed in Europe. They don't even breed within the wider North Atlantic. This bird, as in all the sooty shearwaters that we get on our trips, breed in the South Atlantic. So sooty shearwaters have flown or have a round trip migration of 65,000 kilometers. They cover half the globe on their migration. Huge distance, 65,000 kilometers. So when we see a sooty shearwater such as this one, which I'll never forget, on the 13th of September 2014, it's an amazing thing to think that this bird may have flown 65,000 kilometers on its migration. And at the same time, we might be looking at puffins and gannets that have only moved 65 kilometers up the coast from Baines. So a huge difference in distance there and a real wonder. This particular bird flew and landed right next to the boat to feed on the chum that we were throwing out, and was completely fearless. I've seen sooty shearwaters since then, since 2014, and they've flown up to the boat. They've maybe thought about landing behind the boat, but they've been really nervous. But this particular bird, its character is very different, very fearless, and really not bothered about being next to the boat. So that was a really special experience. Much scarcer birds now, Balearic shearwater. We tend to see, if we're lucky, a Balearic shearwater every year. I don't think we saw one this year, but this one was very memorable. Managed to get a good photograph in 2015. They occur in small numbers on the Yorkshire coastline every year, but this was a particularly memorable experience. Balearic shearwaters, only a small global population, nesting in the Balearic Islands, and we get a small population moving up and down the coast on every year. This was an unforgettable moment, not for me, unfortunately, but for Mark. Mark took this wonderful photograph of a Cory shearwater on the 23rd of August, 2019, and almost certainly one of the best, if not the best, photograph of Cory shearwater taken in Yorkshire. They're a rare bird on the Yorkshire coast, but you to see bigger numbers of Cory shearwaters than off the southwestern approaches, Cornwall, and off the southern part of Ireland. Much better chance of seeing them as they move up from the Bay of Biscay. So that was a really exciting day when this Cory shearwater flew past the boat on the trip that Mark was leading on the 23rd of August. We've only had 2 or 3 storm petrels over the years. This was the best photograph I could get of a storm petrel on the 14th of September 2014. They're a rare bird to see from the boat. You've got to be really lucky, and we were lucky on that day to pick up one. So I thought I'd put a better photograph of a storm petrel that I took on our Yorkshire Coast nature trip off the southern part of Ireland, Cape Clear Island, where we did some boat trips to photograph seabirds and whales and dolphins, and that was an amazing experience. And I think this is a much better photograph, so you can see storm petrel. Beautiful, beautiful bird, very small, and about the size of a house martin. So hopefully next year we might see 1 or 2 on our boat trips on the Yorkshire coast. So not only seabirds we get on the trips, we're always really excited later on in the autumn to see any songbird migrants flying past. On the 31st of August 2018, on the trip that I was leading, a wheatear flew past, and just at that exact moment, on the beautiful calm sea on that day, there were Minky Whales showing, and I had to convince people that they actually had to look at this wheatear flying past, because wheatear has an incredibly long migration between the north of Europe and Africa, and this wheatear was traveling across the North Sea. Amazing experience of seeing it actually just above the waves, just in sight of land, just before it arrived on the Yorkshire coast, all the way from Europe. So that was a really wonderful thing to see, and it was my job as a guide to try and tear people away from the whales and say, look at this wheatear. This is even more exciting. I'm not sure whether I was very successful at that on the day, but I was very pleased to get this photograph. So not only birds, sometimes we see lots of jellyfish, and on the same day as seeing that wheatear fly past, it was calm enough to take this photograph from the boat. So this line mains jellyfish, quite commonly seen from our trips, but you need a really calm day to actually get a photograph of one. We were lucky on that day. So moving now on to whales, cetaceans. Lots of people come on the trips to see the Minky Whales. I remember very clearly when I was birdwatching on the Yorkshire coast in the 1980s as a teenager, nobody mentioned the word whale. I never ever remember anybody saying they've seen a whale. So the Minky Whales really have only started increasing in numbers in the last 20 years or so. We've noticed a really clear increase in sightings. So it was a very exciting time about 20 years ago when everybody started seeing a few Minky Whales, and the numbers have increased since then to the point now where we can safely, hopefully, safely say that they're going to turn up every late summer. And we start seeing them from mid-July onwards, and the numbers tend to peak at the end of August, beginning of September, but it's not guaranteed. And we get really good views, especially in the calmer waters. When it's very calm, we often see as many as a dozen, 15 Minky Whales we can see on one trip. And it's a wonderful opportunity to get photographs of them. Minke Whales are between 8 and 10 meters long. They're one of the commonest cetaceans or whales within the North Atlantic, and they occur right the way from the western side of the UK to the Yorkshire coast, but we don't tend to see them further south than Flamborough. There are not as many reports further south of Flamborough, so they tend to occur in the deeper waters closer to the coastline, where we get the better conditions for them feeding. On our trips, we've tried to take as many photographs as possible of the Minky Whales, and occasionally we get an individual such as this one that has a distinctive dorsal fin. You can see the nick in the dorsal fin, and it may be possible in future years to be able to identify individuals coming back every year, because we suspect there's a particular population of Minky Whales from the North Atlantic that are now using our part of the North Sea. So it's wonderful to get photographs of them on the trips that we do. When we see Minky Whales on the trips, we tend to think we're going to see the classic shape of a minke, such as on this photograph, but occasionally we often see Minky Whales coming straight towards the boat, such as this one on the 27th of August 2016, and in very calm weather you can pick them up, you can see them coming from this angle, and it creates an amazing shape in the sea, and quite an exciting thing to experience, coming straight towards the boat. But in rougher weather, these are the views that we don't tend to get, because in choppier seas it's much more difficult, you can imagine, to see this angle of the whale coming straight towards you. It's much easier to see the whale's side on. And when the sea is very calm and it's got that beautiful oily film to it, then you can get some particularly arty photographs of the silhouette of the whales. And I never forget something that my business colleague, business partner Steve said, whenever you take a particularly rubbish picture, Rich, just call it an arty photograph. So that's my arty photograph of a Minke Whale. Maybe not as cripplingly close as some of the other pictures, but I quite like that one in the very grey blue light on that day. One of the most memorable days we had watching Minke Whales was right at the end of September, the 26th of September 2016. We run the trips right the way through to the end of September and beginning of October every year. This year we were unlucky with the weather. It got very stormy, so the Minke Whales tended to move away, and we couldn't do as many trips as we wanted. But I remember 2016 autumn was absolutely amazing. We had a beautiful period of very calm seas, and on the 26th of September we managed to get about 8 or 10 miles out from Staithes, and we counted as many as 20 Minke Whales in different groups, feeding groups, from the boat at the same time. And several of us got this photograph of 4 Minke Whales together, which is quite difficult to do because Minke Whales tend to be solitary. They don't tend to move around in pods or groups as other cetaceans do. So it was quite amazing. There must have been a lot of herring that day. It must have been a huge area of feed for them to attract this number of whales. So that was a particularly memorable day. So we do see them right up to the end of September if the sea conditions are good and there's still a lot of herring and feed out there. So going back to the excitement of people on the trips, sometime it may be the job of the guide to pump everybody up, although often in cases there's enough around for people to get excited. But then other times we're helped by the excitement of the people on the trips. This was a very memorable trip that Mark led this year, and he managed to get a really, really cracking video, which I'd love to share with you, on the reaction of two of our young clients on the trip to seeing a Minky whale. Yeah, I absolutely love that photograph. That's sorry, the video. It's such a great video, and excitement of those two young people watching the Minky whale was amazing. I suspect they didn't expect to see one, and then were just overwhelmed. So that was a really great experience. So in 2019, we welcomed on board the North Sea Wildlife Trusts, a project started through the work of Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and other wildlife trusts up and down the coastline, getting together to start surveying cetaceans, whales and dolphins, because over the years we've known that these animals are increasing in numbers, but we didn't have any data. It's been very difficult for us to collect data because when we're actually chatting and talking to our people on the boat, it's difficult to do both things, record scientifically the data and also to speak to everybody and make sure everybody had a good trip. So in 2019, through the work of Bex and Anna and others in the North Sea Wildlife Trusts, we welcomed on board some of the surveyors, and Andy here, who Sean and I are talking to, is one of the surveyors. So we have a survey volunteer now on every trip, every year, and we're hoping to have them on board in future years. And they've collected a huge amount of data in the 2 years that they've been working with us and other trip providers on the Yorkshire coast and on the coastline. So they're doing land-based trip surveys as well. They've recorded over 900 sightings of whales and dolphins in only two years, which is quite a stunning result and a fantastic justification for collecting this data. And it's wonderful for us to be part of the conservation of these animals because it's really important. There's going to be so many more pressures in the future, whether they're from trawling activities and overfishing potentially, or developments such as gas installations and exploration off the coastline. It's really important that this data is collected to show how wonderful our coastline is for these animals, because we really need to protect them for the enjoyment of everybody on the coastline, and for the animals' sake themselves. We need to make sure that these animals are protected. So it's been great working with the North Sea Wildlife Trusts in the last 2 years. So moving on from Minky whale now to a really exciting experience. On the 11th of September 2014, I joined a Whitby whale watching trip for the day because I knew there was a humpback whale out there. There was a young humpback whale that had been present for about a week, and I was really keen to see the whale. And I was absolutely blown away. I've never seen a humpback whale since then, but on this particular day, it was amazing. There was lots of Minky whales out from Whitby on that day, and about 10 miles out of Whitby, we found the humpback, and this is a very distinctive shape that humpback whale have, with little hump at the back, completely different from Minky whale. And remarkably, this humpback came very close to the boat without any encouragement at all. It was just curious, and we managed to get incredibly close. And undoubtedly, I've probably got the best photographs that I'll personally ever take in the UK. I've never seen humpback whales anywhere else in the world, so that was a great experience for me. Very, very calm day, perfect conditions. A friend of mine, George, took this photograph of the same individual a few days later. Managed to get it breaching out of the water, which was really exciting. The best thing is that since then, 2014, humpback whales have now been seen every year on the Yorkshire coast. In fact, the Flamborough area seems to be one of the hot spots, and there's been a humpback whale sighting in the last 3 years every autumn. So they tend to be September, early October. September tends to be the peak. So always worth looking out for a humpback whale. One of the most exciting encounters of wildlife I think you could ever have on the Yorkshire coast. So moving on now towards the end of the presentation on dolphins. We've had some fantastic dolphin experiences, but really interesting, the situation with dolphins is that until last year, in 2019, we'd never seen bottlenose dolphin on any of our trips. Our only dolphin experience up until 2019 was the white-beaked dolphins that Mark was lucky to get next to the boat on the 3rd of August and get these wonderful photographs. So white-beaked dolphins are fairly scarce on the Yorkshire coast, but at that time, you were just as likely to see white-beaked as bottlenose. And when I saw the photographs from Mark's trip on that day, I was very jealous because these white-beaked dolphins came very close to the boat, very curious, 3 individuals, and that was a wonderful thing for the clients that were on board. So in 2019, we started getting a few sightings of bottlenose dolphins. And in the last 2 or 3 years on the Yorkshire coast, bottlenose dolphins appear to be now resident animals, which is really, really brilliant to think that they were scarce or rare only 10 years ago, and we didn't really see them. You were very lucky to see a dolphin on the Yorkshire coast only 10 years ago. But now they appear to be the resident population. Some of the identification of the dorsal fins, some of the markings, has established that many of these bottlenose dolphins have originated from the Scottish population off the northeast coastline. So the dolphins that are moving south, and there's a good resident population of Tynemouth as well, and in Northumberland up towards the Farns. So it appears the bottlenose dolphin population has increased potentially or moved south. It's too early to tell whether they're actually increasing, but they definitely now seem to be resident on the Yorkshire coast, which is a wonderful thing for us. Right up until last year, we only really saw Minky Whales, but now having both bottlenose dolphins and Minky Whales is a very special thing. And it's a great opportunity for photography. Minky Whales are great, but you tend to get the same photograph. Everybody tends to get the same photograph of a Minky Whale. Really big animal, very exciting, but dolphins potentially for photography are much more exciting because you never know what they're going to do. There's always the leaping out of the water photograph that everybody wants. So it's a wonderful thing to watch. And in July this year, I was lucky enough to get a copy of a photograph of a bottlenose dolphin jumping and our boat in the background, which was awesome on this particular trip. So it's lovely to have them on the coastline, and the surveys that Yorkshire Wildlife Trust are doing with the volunteers has established a good population now, and we now know where most of them actually hang out, which is really great. This photograph we took in Runswick Bay, which is one of the best places to see them. So if you're actually watching from the coastline, definitely around Runswick Bay, and then further south around Scarborough is a real hot spot at the moment to see the dolphins. So this year we managed to run our trips despite COVID, and this photograph shows us on the trip with our clients, social distancing and with masks. We were very, very pleased to get the trips going again this year, particularly for Sean's business, because him and his family depend on running recreational fishing trips and the Seabird and Wales trips with us. So it was really important to support the economy and the local businesses on the coastline, as well as get our clients out there and the excitement of being out on the waves again this year. So I hope you've enjoyed the talk. Thanks very much for listening and logging on. It's a real honour to start off Migweek this year. It's a wonderful opportunity to celebrate the migration of not only birds but also mammals on the Yorkshire coast, and it's handing over to Mark now, who will round things up with maybe a few questions.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Rich. That was very slick indeed. For those of you watching, and those of you who have seen us speak before, kind of live, as it were, to be talking to a wall, literally, hopefully not metaphorically, is a weird thing, isn't it, Rich? And
It is.
We're doing fine. You did great. It was really fantastic. A couple of questions. There's an anonymous one, which is, you covered it slightly, but why are the minkies there? And are there more there now than historically?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I grew up on that same stretch of coastline in the 1980s as a very, very keen birder. And I don't remember seeing or hearing anybody mention Minky Whales at that time. And so they've really, really just turned up in the last 20 years or so. And I personally feel as though the Minky Whales are doing the same as the Seabirds. They're traveling down from the North Atlantic to take advantage of the big herring spawn in the North Sea, late summer from late July onwards. And just so basically just doing the same as the seabirds. The shearwaters are doing that, the skewers are doing that. All the seabirds, when they finish nesting, depend on the herring. So that whole herring spawning activity supports huge numbers of wildlife in the North Sea. And presumably these minke populations have probably recovered over quite a long period of time through conservation efforts and lack of whaling activities. But it sometimes takes a huge amount of time, a long time, for populations to recover before they start moving into areas that they were previously using. So undoubtedly, they used to be common on the Yorkshire coast, and it's wonderful that they're back again.
Yeah, sure. Okay, there's one from somebody called Amity here. And she asks, what's the most surprising thing you've seen on a boat trip?
Surprising thing?
Yeah.
Well, I think I did put in the spiel to start this, the thrills and spills. I didn't mention any spills, but the most surprising thing was not an animal. The most surprising thing was when the boat broke down last year.
Oh.
But the wonderful thing, the wonderful thing about it, it was that Sean's boat broke down just after we bought it. We had a group of clients on board. We managed to see loads of great birds while he was getting help. But the fact that Sean is also the skipper of the lifeboat meant that we were all safe, and we just got towed back by the lifeboat. So that was the best result, to have the skipper of the lifeboat as the skipper of your trip. So that's the most surprising thing that's happened on a trip.
Something actually just sprung to mind from a trip just a few weeks ago. I think I mentioned it to you, but we were out on a trip, and Sean and I, so the skipper and I, saw bobbing in the distance a great blackback gull and a fulmar feeding on something, and we kind of looked at each other, just, okay, what do we do? Okay, there's whales over there, everyone. But we got closer and closer to it, and we're both like, all right, okay. And I'm just very, very happy to say it was a sheep, and it was 9 miles out. It was actually 10 miles out, and I'm not happy for the sheep, of course, but there was a lot of, well, me and Sean were pretty relieved to see what it actually was, this great blackback and this fulmar squabbling over. So yeah, that was kind of a nice surprise in a sick sort of way.
I thought you were going to say it was a puffin, because I've seen that photograph.
Oh yeah,
I was tempted to put that on.
For those, Rich is referring to a picture, a trip earlier in the season where everybody wants to see puffins, and rightly so. I understand that. Everybody's favourite bird. My favourite bird is a fulmar, and on this particular trip, we enjoyed a fulmar munching its way through a puffin right by the boat.
Which had died of old age prior to that.
Naturally, yeah. Lived a very long and fulfilling life, no doubts. Right, brilliant. Rich, thank you so much. That was fantastic, really entertaining. Apparently we've got loads of people watching and adding all the time. Just to remind everyone, you can watch it again. The link to rewatch will be on the website tomorrow. The website is ywt.org.uk/mini-Migweek-2020. If that makes no sense at all, it's fine. Simply search Mini Migweek 2020 and it comes straight up there. So Mini Migweek 2020. There's loads on there. Anna's produced some brilliant content. We've got, I believe, already there's a really cool live video on there featuring Craig Thomas from Flamborough Bird Observatory about the seabirds. There's more to come as we go along in the week. We're not raising money this year per se for a specific cause. We will be doing again next year. But if anybody wants to join any of our conservation partners, YWT, RSPB, Flamborough Bird Observatory, of course, who are doing just great things right now and moving forward in a fantastic way, please do so. I think that might be about it. Our next talk is on Monday evening at 7 p.m. with Stu McKenzie from Bird Studies Canada, talking technology and migration, and specifically the MOTUS project. It's going to be really fascinating. He's an absolutely brilliant speaker. It will give us a global insight into tracking birds on migration. Yeah, we've got Sorrel coming up on Thursday about diversity in birding, and plenty of other things to enjoy on the website. Keep checking back because the website has been updated every day and we're adding stuff every day. Yeah, loads to look at there. But yeah, thanks to everybody for watching. We really appreciate it. Thanks again, Rich. That was really fantastic. And we'll see you all soon. We'll see you Monday evening. Thanks.